Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war update extra, giving you the extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. We'll just pop into have a little look at Bakhmut because things are ongoing there before going on to sort of deeper topics and whatnot. So just to let you know that, we'll remind you that the activity appears to be taking place on the flanks. That central Bakhmut is actually really tough for the Ukrainians, and they could well lose the rest of the territory in the urban territory in Bakhmut itself as they push to the north and to the south. So, as Noel Reports has just said, unlike on the flanks, the remaining western part of Bakhmut looks less prosperous. Ukrainian troops hold on to only a small number of buildings. Parliament member Honcharenko today confirmed that the difficult situation. Bakhmut, pray for us. The situation is very difficult. TDF, that's Territorial Defence Force, regular brigade and SSO units are fighting for what is left. I quote one of my sources that just got out of Bakhmut, quote, I don't know if we will go there again. It's a random chance to survive, regardless of your skills or unit, as they just wipe out the rest of the buildings. So when you've only got a tiny amount of area left to exist in, you've got a very small area for the Russians to just wipe out with artillery, MLRS, incendiary munition. Just so staying there, it doesn't matter how good a soldier you are, you've got a really high chance of dying. I know from a source of my own that the attrition rate is pretty serious for the Ukrainians. So it could be one of the same sources here, like pulling out there of Ukraine. They have far fewer people than they started with. Let me say that. So things are not easy for those Ukrainian troops inside, as you can see from days of consistent territorial loss to the Russians. But on the flip side, the Ukrainians are doing a pretty amazing job of taking back territory very quickly to the north and south. Will they be able to encircle Bakhmut in a meaningful way anytime over the next week? I don't know. Will it take longer? Will Russia be piling on their reinforcements to the area as well? So Euromaidan Press here says Ukrainian advances near Bakhmut are, quote, the first success of the offensive in the course of the operation to defend Bakhmut. But, quote, this is only a partial success, and this is how it should be perceived. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Malia says that the situation in Bakhmut city and its vicinity is, quote, very difficult, and Russians are transferring reinforcements to the city's outskirts. So, again, you'd expect to see successes north and south, but real serious challenges in the center of Bakhmut. Okay, moving on to some of you go, oh my God, he's not talking about this again, is he? I've said all of what I'm just about to say at different videos in time, but you've got to remember that not everyone watches everything I do. It's good to be reminded. The maxim is that children forget 80% of what they're told within 24 hours. Adults, teaching is repetition. So these things stick on our head, if they are reinforced. And this is all to do with military spending in the US and how much that benefits the US itself. So when you talk about the US spending money on Ukraine, in scare quotes, on Ukraine, what is kind of happening is the US is spending money on itself, upgrading its own capabilities and capacity, and then being able to give Ukraine a load of the stuff that they were always going to replace anyway. And then because there's no way of this is interesting. Someone else was saying this on one of the threads. There's no way of being able to factor depreciation. So when you depreciate vehicles in the car market, right? I used to work for a company, but before many decades back when I was working in the corporate sector, and we used to depreciate vehicles as part of what we did, and it would be 2%. Depreciation rate on a monthly basis, and you'd factor that in. You'd pay for that out of your expenses, and so on and so forth. And that's fine, but that's because you've got loads of good data on the buying and selling of cars. You're always buying and selling cars, and so therefore you can work out, well, if we buy these cars in at this rate and sell them at this rate, then it turns out that they generally depreciate at this fairly consistent rate over time, depending on what's going on with the economy. and so therefore we can um, set that as say 2% a month or whatever it is. I can't remember. I'm kind of pulling that on my backside, but you get the idea. But when it comes to military equipment, like you buy your stuff and you generally don't sell it on, or you sell it on at a time when stuff's happening and it's convenient for you and you've got a new project coming in and new equipment, and then you offload it to other countries or you decommission it and turn it to scrap and so on and so forth. There's really very little resale market to give you a sense of, well, how do we depreciate this? So then when, say, for example, the US, and it's the same for any government, say, right, we are giving $50 million of stuff to Ukraine. What that is so they're giving M113s, old APCs that they're trying to phase out. And they say, right, we're giving 50 of these to Ukraine. They don't know how much they're worth now. They've been sitting in warehouses for a bunch of time, etc., etc. So what they do is they say, well, to make these new and buy these new, because we can still make them even though they're old. We don't want to buy old stuff. We want to buy new stuff. We'll talk about that in a second. But if we were to buy new old stuff, they would cost X amount of money. So we're going to give these 50 M113s to Ukraine, and they are worth, scare quotes, worth whatever $1 million. Except they're not. They're actually worth kind of nothing, in a sense. Like, they're bought and paid for, and you're going to replace them. They're only worth what you'd be able to sell them on the open market internationally, and maybe you might not be able to do that. In other words, there might be a cost to decommission them. So actually, this is arguably, in some instances, you are saving money by not having to decommission dangerous goods. And it's the same with munitions as well. You are able to give that to Ukraine and then put a price tag on it, and then say, we've just given $50 million worth of stuff to Ukraine. But then loads of people go, oh my God, why aren't we spending that on the hospitals? And you're like, no, it doesn't work like that. It's not really 50 million, etc. And that's not the same for all pieces of gear. Anyway, this Defense News piece kind of talks a lot about this, but it talks a lot about how, well, not quite what it's saying there, but some of the added benefits and the fact that what's happening with some of the funding that's going, scare quotes, to Ukraine, it's actually going to the US Army to upgrade the army, essentially. So it's just worth having this in your mind, especially whenever you see figures being thrown about. And I gave you analysis of figures previously and said, and quite often some of those figures are payments that go on beyond 2030. So it's not like 50 million now out of the budget, out of our coffers now, and throw those notes at Ukraine. It's like $50 million we're broadly going to spend. $50 million, which is actually like, I'm making this up, which is actually like $15 million, and we're going to spend almost all of that in the US. That's the reality of it. And then the US gets better stuff, and that puts the US in a better position vis-a-vis conflicts like China. So you get some people arguing at the moment the US needs not concentrate on Ukraine, it needs to concentrate on China. So we shouldn't be spending money. The US shouldn't be spending money on Ukraine. It should be spending money on China and Taiwan and sorting out Taiwan. But the money being spent on Ukraine is almost directly being spent to take on that Taiwanese challenge. So the money that's being spent on, scare quotes, on Ukraine is to a large extent, not entirely, but to a large extent getting spent on the US military so it can upgrade and put itself in a far better position to be able to fight China in a future point or defend Taiwan or so on and so forth. And so it needs to be a nuanced understanding. Anyway, this piece, did Ukraine funding spare the US Army from budget cuts? So let's dip into it a little bit further down. In March, the service rolled out a $185.5 billion budget. Goodness me, that's a big old budget. With few surprises and none of the significant cuts officials had braced for. Instead, the service had used Ukraine supplemental funds in key programs, allowing the US Army to bolster several initiatives, even though its regular spending plan showed essentially no growth. So bolstering initiatives, even though its regular spending plan showed essentially no growth. I think that's a really key point there. The supplemental funding, quote, the supplemental funding is the untold story about how it helps the army, Tom Spur, a research supervisor at the Heritage Foundation think tank, told Defence News. Then it goes on to talk about this kind of funding and how actually the army does better than Navy and the Air Force. That actually they're broadly keeping in line with budgetary levels as they were. Um, Quote, the army is getting back equipment that is in some way better than the equipment it gave up, he said. And, quote, they're able to get it faster because the demand created by the war in Ukraine has allowed for either an expansion in the industrial base or the per unit cost of the systems is coming down because companies are making more. Therefore, for a fixed amount of money, the army can actually afford to buy more systems. So, for example, and he talks here about the M113. So, take the army's armored multi-purpose vehicle, for example. Since Russia invaded its neighbor more than a year ago, the service has pulled from its stocks to send to Ukraine 400 of the 1960s era M113 vehicles, which carry troops into battle. So, imagine this: the US has given 400 M113s. They would put a price tag on that. Those M113s are basically sitting around doing the square root of bugger all, and and therefore it's not really costing me. It's going to cost transport costs, but that stuff that's been bought and paid for probably doesn't have a future. It's going to, well, it doesn't. It's going to be phased out. These vehicles are already going to be phased out. Uh, so they're shipping them to Ukraine and putting a price tag on that. As the army weighs how best to replace those vehicles, top officials have made clear that they do not want to buy more of the outdated M113s. The service's chief of staff told Defence News last year that the army prefers to replace old equipment with new items. As he put it, the service doesn't want to add new old stuff. What we want to do is buy new things. The AMPV program, so that's the armored multi-purpose vehicle program, was meant to replace the aging M113 fleet and help modernize an armored brigade combat team's fleet. BAE Systems won the contract nearly a decade ago. The company delivered the first AMPVs to the first unit earlier this month. The army plans to build and field 2,897 vehicles total, according to FY20 financial year 24 budget documents. So they're being made in York, Pennsylvania, by BAE Systems. Now the army is expected to approve AMPV's full rate production this month, and they're going to ramp up building 12 of those a month to 16 of those a month, and build just a load more, etc., etc. I could bore you with all the facts and figures there. But AMPV isn't the only new program set to benefit. McConville has said that the army will replace M777 towed artillery systems sent to Ukraine with. So this is interesting. They're going to replace those towed howitzers with HIMARS, high mobility artillery rocket systems, while also replenishing supplies of Stinger missiles sent to Ukraine with a longer range version. So, we'll give you all these Stingers because we're going to get a better version in ourselves. And that's how it works. Then the part of this article is better deals. Sending thousands of weapons systems to Ukraine means the US Army is also increasing the volume of some systems it planned to buy, leading to lower estimated costs. In the case of HIMARS, the mobile rocket launcher that has given Ukrainian troops an improved ability to fire on enemy targets at standoff ranges, the army now plans to buy 7 more in financial year 25 than previously expected. According to FY24 budget documents, the service wants to increase production capacity from 60 to 72 launches per year in February 2025, and by October of that year, the facility of HIMARS manufacturer Lockheed Martin will be able to make up to 96 launches a year, enough for the US and foreign customers. So this is where it might be worth popping in to see what's happened just today. The first 5 HIMARS launchers purchased by Poland, so it's purchased 20. The first 5 of them are to be delivered to Poland on board an Antonov AN-124 Ruslan aircraft. All 20 HIMARS launches ordered so far by Poland, and looks to be more, are to be delivered by the end of this year. They're really ramping up production. Of course, this is then good for US corporations, Lockheed Martin in this case. Because of this ramp up, financial year 24 budget documents indicate the launch's cost has dropped from 6.8 million to 6.4 million. The quote, the synergy of foreign military sales and the increased production capacity contributes to a decreased launcher unit cost, the document read. And they're also ramping up the rockets from the rocket manufacturers from 6,000 to 14,000 a year, and that's bringing the unit cost of them down. So the Gimlets per unit price is expected to drop significantly. In financial year 23, the Army expected each to cost nearly 189,000. In financial year 24, this year, it predicts a unit will cost just shy of 169,000. So that's $20,000 less per rocket, according to financial year 24 budget documents. And the modernization is accelerating. The army planned prior to the war in Ukraine to spend $16 billion over 15 years to upgrade its aging organic industrial base, specifically focused on the 23 depots, arsenals, and ammunition plants. With the supplemental funding, the army plans to use about $2 billion to get some of these projects done earlier. We're working with congressional support with industry to get production rates up, he added. Get after obsolescence, really improve the machinery of our precision munitions production capacity in this country for the army, which in a fight with an adversary, a potential one like China, is going to be absolutely vital. And there we go, explicit reference to how the US will be in a better position to counteract any threats from China regarding Taiwan or at any other place and points. So on and so forth. There are loads more detail in there, and all of this I've told you in other ways previously, but it just kind of reminds you that we just need to be really careful of how we understand facts and the figures of the support that we are giving. And it's not a zero sum game. It's in the sense that I suppose technically it is in some sense, as in if you're going to spend 10 billion quid on defense spending, if you're not going to spend 10 billion quid, then you can spend it on other stuff, right? But the point here is that the US are going to be spending money on their defense budget anyway. It's just shuffling all this stuff around so that actually they're getting newer stuff and their older stuff is going to Ukraine. And that's kind of, it's not just how it happens. There is stuff that they are buying to produce to get out there as well that they need hot off the the, the manufacturing lines, I guess. But it's understanding that this is kind of nuanced, and it's not like the aid to Ukraine is at the expense of building hospitals or whatever it is that, or building walls or whatever floats your boat. Yeah, it's just it's nuance, isn't it? So right, let's try and link this to Storm Shadows. Storm Shadow, the missiles from the UK. People are wondering how many they've got. Thomas C. Tyner has said Ukraine won't get more than a dozen Storm Shadows. He's quoting some Russian cope saying that. He says, lol, Ukraine can fire 20 Storm Shadows per day for the next 2 weeks and still have enough for its offensive. The only limiting factor is that soon there won't be any Russian targets anymore. So he's really, sometimes Thomas Tyner does get carried away with optimism. Well, why isn't that happening if they have that many? But it's interesting looking at some of the conversations around this and trying to work out actually how many of these missiles they have. It's thought that they've got about it's thought that the UK have got about 1,000 of these. So how many would we give to Ukraine? Well, again, to go back to what we are talking about earlier, it turns out that the UK are phasing these out to replace them with other missiles. So essentially, we have all 1,000 to give to Ukraine. We could literally say, here are all the Storm Shadows. We're not going to use them anymore. And then you put a price tag on that. We get rid of them anyway. And in fact, when you get rid of things like that, you're likely to have to decommission them and take them apart. That becomes quite expensive. So actually, to give them wholesale, it's cheaper to give them away than to keep them. These things are worth taking into account. Anyway, someone says, I don't know how China gets a mass from this, to be honest. Most countries have like 100 to 200 of these. UK is rumored to have 700 to 1,000 before sharing them with Ukraine. 20 per day for 2 weeks alone is 280 rockets. UK would need to cede nearly its entire arsenal. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the point. As they are, as I say, being replaced by another Another missile. Here it is. The UK's inventory is far higher than most people realise. Most estimates I've seen online are not close to the right ballpark by several integers. The MOD is transitioning to CAM and CAM ER anyway, with a CASOM variant already in service last year. So actually, they're already phasing these things out. So it could be. Imagine Ukraine suddenly having 1,000 of these missiles. It's just right. We need to get the airframes up with these. It depends how many airplanes have been fitted with the ability to carry these. But yeah, right. Just going on to talk a little bit about propaganda, and Julia Davis here for Russian Media Monitor, who translates a load of stuff that, goodness me, that's a thankless task in terms of having to wade through a genocidal propaganda and translate it. Timothy, she says, what what we see on this kind of interview that I'm going to go through in a second, and a little bit from Timothy Snyder, who's a historian I've lent on before, gives you an insight into the kind of machinations of the mind of Putin and so on and so forth. So Timothy Snyder here says Western analysts spend a lot of time plunging the depths of Putin's mind, often to explain to us that his psychological commitments are such that he cannot lose in Ukraine. I agree that he cares about Ukraine to an unhealthy degree. Incidentally, that doesn't mean he actually cares about Ukraine. He cares about the idea of controlling Ukraine. He doesn't care for Ukrainians or for Ukrainian culture. Just as easy wipe them off the face of the earth and destroy that culture forever. He doesn't care about Ukraine. He cares about Ukraine. He cares about Crimea and what it can give him in terms of utility. He cares about not losing and therefore winning in Ukraine. So he cares about that to an unhealthy degree. Schneider said, I was writing about this a long time ago, and his misunderstanding of the country has indeed brought hubris, catastrophe, nemesis. But the fixation on Ukraine is connected to something deeper, the idea that tyranny is forever a personal obsession with losing power. Oh, he uses double spaces, doesn't he, after a full stop? Ah, it's a big no-go. Come on, man. This is 2023. Putin's obsession with eternal personal power was one of the forces that led him to try to suppress Ukraine by military force, a neighboring country where people made their wishes known, where elections worked, where protest was commonplace. Ukraine was a dangerous model for Russia, at least for Putin, at least as Putin understands Russia. This is really true. So Ukraine is just a massive threat to the Russian way of doing things. When you have a country if you're running an autocratic regime where actually you want everyone to conform to your idea of humanity and culture and this and that, and you want to hold on to that power forever because actually it's a little bit of an existential crisis. If you were to lose power and you get some kind of democratic government in that becomes accountable to the people, then you can actually end up being found out as like, oh, you were in charge of the country for all these years. We just found out all these terrible things have happened, and you've murdered these people. You're going to go to prison now. So there's a very personal desire, I would imagine, for Putin to hold on to power for his own existential kind of future. Um, so that's really important. But then when you see your neighbors have a way of having succession of power that is peaceful and democratic, that becomes a threat because it's saying to the people of Russia, look what you could have. Do you want to know what you could have won? This is an ideal. This is kind of a political ideal, and it's right next door to us. And you've got family there who are telling you, "Oh, we just went and voted. It's great. We've got a new president, and the last president we didn't like very much and voted out, and etc. etc." You got a peaceful transfer of power, and then you're being able to compare that to what's going on in Russia, and people start getting restless and saying, "Well, hang on, why can't we have that?" So you have to say, so what Putin has to do is say how terrible that is. They're all Ukraine-Nazis and drug-addled leaders and all this kind of stuff. So you deface Ukraine, and then you say, and then we want to like change that leadership to a puppet government that's far like Lukashenko in Belarus. That's far more in line with the Kremlin. And when they step out of line, like Lukashenko, you can like maybe we can poison you or throw you out a window or whatever. So there is an existential threat both to Putin and to the the autocracy, the oligarchy that is the Russian political system, and it's dangerous to have the ability for your population to look over the fence with with eyes of envy. Um, Anyway, sorry, I digress. His idea of rescuing, so Putin's idea of rescuing scare quotes, Russian-speaking people in Ukraine always meant conquering them, humiliating them, taming them. Remember, Zelensky himself is one of those people. Ukraine is a country in the world where more people say that they want what they want in the Russian language than anywhere else. So this is the key. You got people there, yeah, they speak Russian and they say what they want and they can vote for who they want. And that's a threat to Russia itself, to the Russian Federation. It was that freedom expressed in Russian that threatened Putinism. Now Ukraine threatens Putinism in other ways, which can bring other reactions, so on and so forth. So, interesting piece in Timothy Snyder's Substack, War and Politics is his piece. Why what happens in Bakhmut matters in Russia. I guess when you start then seeing a place like Bakhmut as emblematic of this struggle, the epitome of this struggle, the kind of like, just yeah, what I've said. Then Bakhmut becomes more than just fighting over, not just fighting, but it's more than fighting over a town, a random town in the east of Ukraine that offers no particular strategic value. It's actually emblematic of this struggle. And so, if Russia are to be seen to lose Bakhmut, then that is a massive PR loss, and that feeds into the threat that Ukraine really are to Russia, not immediately militarily, but as this kind of successful, self-determining entity that can also defeat our armies and can continue to have this kind of democratic landscape that many of the Russian population might be jealous of. Um, so then you kind of piece together that kind of idea of how Putin's thinking with the insanity that goes on behind the Iron Curtain, I guess, behind well inside Russia on state TV. Just I've shared with you before lots of really egregious, genocidal, horrific propaganda from state television. Here is another example. We have a pretty famous. Who do we have? It is what's his name? Oops. No, it doesn't say there. It says here, which is Russian propagandist Akim Apachev. So he's this guy with the beard. He's going to be interviewed by Anton Krasovsky, who was a guy who previously. So he's the former director of broadcasting on RT, and he was a guy that basically advocated for burning Ukrainians and drowning children and all sorts of terrible things in that one particular interview that I shared with you previously. Anyway, let's return. I'm going to read this to you. Remember, lots of you listen to this, and I know some of you get annoyed that I read stuff. Just play the video or whatever. Or A, it's in Russian, and B, as I say, there are people listening. So the interviewer says, "Are we at war against Ukraine or against Ukrainians?" I've put this on slightly quicker speed so I can read it quicker. And the guy he's interviewing, this musician and propagandist, says, "We are at war against an idea. We aren't at war." Uh, sorry, a bit of back and forth between the two. Uh, we aren't at war against Ukraine or the Ukrainian people. Are the Ukrainian people fighting against us? Says the interviewer. Yes, the bearers of this idea are we have to destroy, to kill all bearers of the Ukrainian national idea. Are they the majority in Ukraine right now? Asked the interviewer. The bearers of this idea, yes. So, but he does go on and qualify this later, but only because he's challenged to, and he kind of changed his idea. So right now, in his mind, we have to kill the bearers of this idea of Ukraine, and they are the majority of people in Ukraine. In other words, he is advocating genocide here. He's advocating the killing of the majority of Ukrainians. I mean, absolutely horrendous. But they became a majority not because they worked well. He actually digs himself even further into a hole here before he kind of changes tack a little bit. Uh, not because they worked well, but because we didn't do anything in terms of ideology. So actually, what he said is that these guys are the bearers of a bad idea. They're the majority of the population of Ukraine. That we should kill them, and actually, it's not their fault; it's our fault for not getting involved sooner. So the interviewer's like, "Hang on a second, mate. Are you saying it's our fault that these people are in the position they're in, and we should now have to kill them all as a result of something that's our fault?" You can see that this is a really morally problematic position. So anyway, the interviewer says, "So you say we should kill the bearers of the idea? They are the majority, and we are at fault for them being the bearers of this idea." Uh, uh, they're not the majority. I will disagree with this, with what he's just said. They're about 10% of so-called passionaries. Uh, they are the ones who should be killed. So he's like gone back and, oh, okay, that makes me look like a complete bastard. So maybe I'm assuming he's just plucking this number out of his posterior. Like, okay, actually, no, it's not the majority. It's 10% of people. They're the ones who should be killed. Everyone else is, yeah, we should kill the rest of the 90%. Anyway, to continue, he says they are the ones who should be killed, and the rest will become Russians again. This is something we hear so commonly. It's like, yeah, they're just going through a phase. They just need to be brought back into the fold, and then we can, re-brainwash them or something. 10% who should be killed. The rest of them shouldn't be killed. They'll become Russian again, and that's it. And the other guy says because of fear. No, then why? Because the majority of the population is prone to repeating the mainstream agenda. It works the same way here. The idea for this propagandist is that these guys only believe this kind of nonsense because they're just listening to mainstream uh, propaganda, not because they're scared and not because of X, Y, and Z. Well, he also says the propagandist, well, just like here, there's a kind of implicit acceptance that hey, there's mainstream propaganda going on in Russia as well. Anyway, let's skip to a later point. So he talks about waging war, and he says, unfortunately, there is no other way to exist or to survive. In this guy, that's the interviewer. The guy says, to exist, we should wage war not out of hatred. So, hey, this isn't out of hatred that we're going to invade your country and wage war. Interesting, he's talking about war. I've gone through all these phases in 2014. At first, I sincerely hated them. Then I tried to understand them. Now I have a clear position. I don't hate them. They are also the bearers of an idea. We have to kill them, but not out of hatred. We should kill them out of love. I don't think there would be any context that I could sit down and say, do you know what? I think we should kill these people out of love. And he's going to go on to talk about, well, love. You might think love for who here? We should kill them out of love for our children because this will ensure our survival. It's very simple. In other words, we should kill Ukraine because actually they're a threat to our children and our survival. It's getting back to this existential idea of uh, Ukraine being a threat to Russian existence and the Russian way of life and the Russian regime, the Russian culture. As if these other people can't have self-determination and have a right to have their own culture and perceive their own culture, uh, and that they can't exist at the same time as people who feel Russian in Russia. Like they can't have that. That's somehow a threat to us. Really? And then the interviewer says, well, why do you think that if Russia would kill 2 million of the bearers of an idea, Ukraine will suddenly want peace? Great question, to be fair. First of all, it won't have a choice. Oh, I love this. I love this kind of idea of liberation. It won't have a choice. Would you want for this to be watched in Ukraine? Yes, of course. What would you tell them? Surrender. Why would they surrender? Because one way or another, we'll come for them. Are you certain of that? Yes, I am. I'm ready to stand. I'm ready to stand is not an answer. So this is the interviewer saying that. You're ready to stand and they're ready to kill you. They're ready to kill me too, says the interviewer. Your words convey no certainty that we will win. I'm not doing this at all for the sake of victory, says the guy being interviewed. I'm participating for the sake of process. No, hold on a second. Sooner or later, we'll have to talk to some of them, to those who will survive. I don't know how long it takes, says the guy being interviewed. 5 or 10 years. Sooner or later, we'll have to talk to them. In 5 years, I'll be ready to talk to that man over there. Right now, I have nothing to say to him other than the desire to throw a spear at him. But sooner or later, we'll have to talk to him. I don't know whom it will be. I don't know the way I'll be by then and whether I'll even make it there. But these conversations will have to take place. In Mariupol, I saw a man run from around the corner with a huge head of hair and an enormous beard, yelling Allahu Akbar and launching 2 carrots, scarecrow carrots. I've seen the same in the Syrian Arab Republic, but they weren't for us. We used to fight against them. As time goes by, you have to look in that direction, and over there, we'll come to understand each other. Of course, right now, we have to kill them, but we'll eventually have to talk with those who survive. It goes on and on. I mean, you get the idea. There's just, it's a little bit all over the place, but there's just this really strong desire to kill Ukrainians who want to be Ukrainian, that carry this idea of Ukrainianness. Uh, just, it's the absolute opposite of liberation. It's the absolute opposite of decent moral behavior. This is advocacy for genocide. Interestingly, the guy interviewing is kind of doing a bit of a job of challenging him, even though he's previously exhibited his own disgusting genocidal views. He is actually sort of challenging uh, the guy being interviewed, but yeah, just the fact that this is on TV, state TV by the looks of it, or national TV, is just pretty damned horrific. Anyway, let's move on to other things because there's only so much genocide you can take before your ears start bleeding. This is retired Russian Air Force General Labushko. He was paid to set up the national air defense system against cruise missiles and ballistic missiles in Russia. Turns out the system doesn't work because he embezzled the money. He was arrested earlier this month. And this is a system I actually talked to you about previously. Labushko was contracted to establish the National Center for State Defense Control in 2006 to develop the Missile Attack Warning System, SPRN, which is currently on combat duty but turned out to be full of holes because of large-scale corruption. Not all heroes wear capes. I love that. This is a hero for Ukraine because he's embezzled money and stopped decent stuff from being constructed within Russia, decent defenses. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last subject, which is Bellingcat. So, who are Bellingcat? Bellingcat are they're based in the Netherlands, but actually started by a British journalist, blogger, Elliot Higgins in 2014. They've now become an absolute cornerstone of the open source intelligence community, and they do a whole bunch of really significant work, and they're doing good work because pro-Russian voices on any video that ever mentions Bellingcat will slag off Bellingcat in the most puerile way, saying that this, saying that, and it's just absolutely out of the bot factory training manual. And I'm sure the people down below, some pro-Russian voices will do this. It's just repeating the same old tired anti-Elliot Higgins, anti-Bellingcat rhetoric, which is basically pathetic. And it's because these guys do that good a job, and they have found out working Russian intelligence personnel and outed them. Most famously, they did a superb job concerning the Salisbury poisonings. So, for those around the world who don't know what happened, there was a guy called Sergei Skripal who was formerly from Russia, who was living in Salisbury with his daughter, and they were both poisoned by some Russian agents who then did a runner back to Russia, but they were caught on CCTV. And anyway, Bellingcat outed them, found out who they were, and did loads of work around this, which is well worth looking into, but I won't dwell on that. And then these guys, just to give you a little bit more context, these guys then were interviewed, I think actually by Margarita Simonian, who's now a terrible, terrible propagandist in the same vein as what we've just seen. But she interviewed them and actually pushed back a little bit. There's a few years back, on these guys who were clearly intelligence personnel. And what was hilarious about this was a super famous interview in the UK, because basically, if you asked anyone in the UK about Salisbury, I know a little bit about Salisbury because it's down the road from me. But if you were to ask most people in the UK, oh, tell me something about Salisbury, they'd go, I don't know. I don't even know where it is. Like, Salisbury? Okay. Yeah. Might have a cathedral. That's probably about it. But actually, most people wouldn't know that. It's not a hugely relevant place. It's a small town. It's technically a city because it has a cathedral. In how we define cities in the UK, but no one knows anything about it really. And then these guys are like trying to explain why they were caught on CCTV walking very near to Sergei Skripal's house. What happens is they went and they had a perfume container with Novichok in, and they sprayed the door handle, if I remember this correctly, and to get on Sergei Skripal's hands, and then another agent would kill him. Anyway, it made him and his daughter really, really poorly. They went to a restaurant at Pizza Express, I think, and it all went south from there. The people that died were actually someone who found the perfume bottle in a bin and then decided to keep it and spray it on them, and then her and someone she knew died. And yeah, and it was all pretty terrible. But this is these guys in interview being dubbed over. So it just
were shown to you in the pictures, Ruslan Bashirov and Alexander Petrov.
Are those your real names?
Yes, they are our real names.
Even now when you're talking about it, to tell the truth, you look very nervous. On the CCTV footage from London, you walk in those now famous coats and sneakers in Salisbury. Are these people you?
Yeah, that's us.
What were you doing there?
Our friends had been suggesting for a long time that we visit this wonderful town.
There's the famous Salisbury Cathedral, famous not only in Europe, but in the whole world. It's famous for its 123-meter spire. It is famous for its clock, the one of the first ever created in the world that's still working.
It's just absolute. And so this went down as a classic interview because, like, no one says anything like that. Like, our friends wanted us to visit Salisbury to see the cathedral, not only famous in Europe, but in the whole world. It's like, go and ask 100 Americans about Salisbury Cathedral. They wouldn't be able to tell you jack about it. And it's like, it's 123 meters spire. It's like, how do you know that? And so it turns out that basically they just read the Wikipedia page. And this was a whole like joke. This became a bit of a running joke. And the Wikipedia page, I don't know if it's changed since then, Salisbury. And you get a couple of these things about 123 meters spire, the tallest in the UK. And then the spire's clock was installed in 1386 as one of the oldest surviving mechanical clocks in the world. And they're just basically spouting a Wikipedia.
One of the first ever created in the world that's still working. You can't imagine what it's like. We'd like if one day the real perpetrators are found and we're given an apology.
It's just, and so it goes on. It's absolute nonsense. So these guys just read Wikipedia to try and get themselves out of it. They, at the end, actually, she did some quite good. She did pressure them a little bit, Simonian, and they said,
Tell anything so that we believe you. Everyone has questions. What do you do?
To cut a long story short, we're in the fitness industry.
We're in the fitness industry. There you go. Just yeah. Anyway, complete nonsense. So why am I mentioning Bellingcat? Well, it's another proper issue with Twitter. And I'm sorry for those who love Elon Musk and all that, whatever. But Twitter's really important to me. It's really important to the open source intelligence community. It's really important to as an aggregator of information. It's massively important for that. Yes, it's a cesspit, and yes, it's this and that, and a lot of people don't use it, but a lot of people do use it. Politicians use it, journalists use it, I use it, open source intelligence people use it, etc., etc. Like scientists and experts and professionals, and it's a way of swapping information and aggregating it and all sorts. It is a phenomenal resource. It can be a phenomenal resource, but it's also going through loads of problems at the moment. One of them is that it appears that some of the coding that's being put in place is disadvantaging Ukraine and advantaging Russia. Here's an example. So the TLDR of this is Twitter has classified Bellingcat as an account similar to one posting pornography, i.e. sensitive content, for truth-hating edgelords like Elon. Says this person obviously not a fan of Elon Musk. This means that you need to disable an obscure setting which does not even appear on the iOS apps to be able to view Bellingcat. So you can't even see Bellingcat's work because they've been sidelined. And this reminds me of the coding news that came out that I reported some months back. Just to remind those who aren't aware of this or forgotten, Yahoo News dropped a bombshell, and it revealed in an analysis of Twitter's algorithm code. So it got hold of somebody leaked a whole bunch of Twitter's coding on to Twitter and online, and this caused a load of ruckus because we found out a bunch of stuff. That the free speech absolutist of Elon Musk was actually had the code written to amplify his voice over everyone else's. So people would read his. He was really annoyed that was it that Joe Biden got more views on his what he said or something than he did, and so he then changed the coding so that his voice would be amplified more, so more people see what he said, because he's a free speech absolutist, right? He's just a little bit more free than everyone else. Anyway, what else was in the code was this. So a new analysis of Twitter's algorithm code found that Twitter is downranking tweets that about Ukraine on its feeds. Keep in mind that Elon Musk has been parroting pro-Russian, pro-Putin propaganda non-stop, and he even pushed a peace plan that heavily favored Russia and attacked Ukrainian President Zelensky. Yahoo also reports that Twitter users who post frequently on Ukraine topics had noticed less engagement with their accounts since Musk took over the platform in October last year. So anyway, what happened is Ukraine news was put, it was literally coded at the same as disinformation. And so anything reporting Ukraine news would be downranked as much as anything that is bona fide disinformation. And you're like, why would you do that? Like, why would you do that? Unless you are doing things purposefully in favor of Russia. I don't, there might be a reason, but you can tell us a reason, because otherwise we think the worst. And here's another example: Bellingcat being downgraded. Bellingcat are like your big arch nemesis of Russia and the Kremlin. Like, they hate Bellingcat. Why would you then have your coding disadvantage the voice of Bellingcat? Why would you do that? So anyway, that's pretty much my last thing. Anyway, that's the end of today's extra. I've banged on for too long. Thank you for listening. Really appreciate you spending the time here. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I will speak to you again soon.